Hey guys, it's Matt and JD, and we're going to go over VIP member Bob G's game today. He's on the black side of a Caro-Kann Tartakower.
By transposition, it started off as the super topical two knights that we have seen about a bajillion times lately.
Yeah, Eric Rosen, I think, did a video on this, and it became pretty popular. So this is what we recommend in our Caro-Kann course. After takes, white plays d4, which is played in the game. This transposes Tartakower accepted, one of the mainstays of our course.
Yeah, I love these positions. I think they're a blast.
And it's kind of autopilot, these next few moves. Like you always put the bishop on d6, you
You
always
can
castle.
pre-move the next like three or four moves. Just here, and here, and then you sack on h3. It works every time.
That's right. So we see bishop to e3 by white. And oftentimes these natural looking moves for white can create some problems when you combine them together if there's small inaccuracies. Like we're going to see this h pawn can become a target, and this bishop on e3 can become a weakness for white.
It allows us some ideas with this pawn coming to f4, especially if they block in the bishop. So the bishop be setting on e3, and it doesn't have any squares to go, just encouraging us to advance on the king side, like we already kind of want to do.
So let's see. Knight back to f8, bishop to e6, knight d2. And now here
And
what we're looking at is this kingside attack.
yeah, I mean, I've probably had this position at least a dozen times myself. Like I've seen this a bunch of times, and I think their idea is they're going to try to transfer the knight here, and they're going to harass our bishop, which is kind of obnoxious, but it's not that big of a problem. We can actually just drop the bishop back out of the way, anticipating that the knight's going to come, and then we're just happy.
And I think
But
that's the strongest move, bishop c7, but this is kind of thematic. Like we've seen a lot of h3 pawn sacrifices in the Tartakower, and I know that's what Bob's thinking. He wants to sacrifice.
yeah, absolutely, and so do I.
So knight e4 played. And here you could play bishop takes h3. It's definitely worth considering. So there's this line, bishop takes h3, knight takes d6, queen takes d6, g takes h, rook takes, pawn takes, queen here. But in the end, we're just going to get a repetition. Queen checks back and forth. And you have to ask yourself, do I want to draw in this position? But if you do, it is nice to have that as an option. Bishop
Yeah,
takes h3 there leads to a draw with best play.
yeah, definitely. And here, Bob plays bishop to b8, which is a nice move, I admit. I think more natural feels like to go to c8, and it's not clear why that's so much worse. I suppose the idea that we open up with coming back to b8 is that the queen can come to c7, and since there's no knight on f3, we actually have some mating threats here, and we might provoke or force this g3 move, picking up the pawn on h3. I think that might be the idea behind bishop to b8 and why it's perhaps slightly stronger than bishop to c7, though I think they're probably roughly equivalent moves.
I think you're right. I think that's the main difference, though. It keeps the c7 square open for the queen. Now we see knight c5, and there we go. Queen c7, threatening checkmate in one. There's only one good move for white here. It's f4. Look at the bishop on e3, trapped in by all of these pawns, and it's currently undefended. What do you think of this?
It's just an easy tactic. I think this is maybe your second or third puzzle of a puzzle rush where you just grab a quick pawn for nothing for
Yeah,
nothing.
Bob finds it. Bishop takes h3. Opponent, though, does not immediately grab the bishop. And the interesting thing here, and Bob puts this in his notes, even though white's down a pawn, that king is going to slide to f2. The rook is going to come over to h1. And all of a sudden, white gets a little bit of compensation for that pawn, even though I think black should still have a small edge.
Yeah, I think so. That black definitely has a small edge, and I think that part of the reason why we don't have a bigger edge is perhaps a side effect of this bishop b8, because now it's going to take several moves for this rook to play, and in the time it takes for this rook to play, white might be able to try to generate something.
So in this position, bishop e6 was played. This is really interesting. There is a line bishop to g4. I think that's the strongest move. After queen takes, we have rook takes e3, and there's a couple things going on here. The first is white cannot put a rook on e1 because we can simply take, and after they take back, win the pawn on f4. And the second
Mm-hmm.
is we have pawn to b6 attacking the knight, which defends the bishop. So we definitely have the initiative here, and it's not white just getting this real quick attack against our king.
I think there's another reason as well that this bishop g4 is good, and it's just that it exchanges a few pieces. And I mean, white has this pawn on f4 and this pawn on d4, and we're a little bit cramped for space. And we're especially on the queen side, we need some squares to get out. And I think just exchanging a few pieces off gives us a bit more room to breathe.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the other move that could have been played was bishop to c8. That one just looks strange. I don't completely understand it. So bishop e6 played. And Bob mentioned in the notes he was actually cool with this trade. Knight takes e6. He has a few options. I'm not sure which way he would have captured back. So king f2 played. And now all of a sudden we see this idea. Rook to h1 coming for the quick attack. This is somewhat common in the Tartakower. Not so much the h-file attack, but sometimes when like White Castle's queenside, you'll see these sort of ideas. We got to figure out, how do I defend this kingside structure against that light square bishop? And almost always the idea is you can put pawns on g6 and f5, or g6, this pawn goes to f5, and maybe you either push past or just sit still. But we're going to see coming up an important g6 right here. So instead of queen c8, which is played in the game, got to play g6.
Yeah, I think that this makes sense because I mean, as the line goes with this with Queen coming, he says in his notes that he wanted to play Bishop g4, but that's just never going to happen. I mean, f5 happens immediately, and now your bishop is forced to go, and you've shut off kind of yourself from defending your own king side. If you play g6 now, things are going to open up.
Yeah. So this is a long-term attack for white, and white definitely has the advantage here, more than a pawn worth the comp.
But against g6 instead of this, and now if f5 comes, it doesn't quite work the same because we have bishop d5 hitting with tempo, and then when the queen slides out of the way, we can actually just kick this knight. It's not a big deal. The knight has to go back somewhere. It's not really clear exactly where you would want to go. I mean, if you come back to this natural square, well, now you have a really nice maneuver with this queen takes g3, takes and takes. And if you take here, well, now I just pick up a piece and I'm
Yeah,
quite happy.
beautiful tactic. And if you're a Tartakower player, remember that bishop to d5 idea too, right? You had that nice tempo against the queen, and that opened up these tactics along the e-file too, this e3 bishop being attacked.
That's something I've seen in my experience a lot in the Tartakower is that if you can get this bishop safely to d5, it's often an incredibly strong piece.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially in conjunction, if you can get the bishop on d5, you have these knight g6, knight h4 ideas, and g2 can become a real problem. There's some really beautiful tactics that happen in a lot of positions revolving around those two ideas.
So let's see. In the game, knight takes e6 was played. Queen takes e6, and I think that relieved a little bit of the pressure off of Bob. Here again, though, f5 is critical for white, I think, to try to hold an advantage. You want to shut down this pawn on f6, open up the dark square bishop, and that'll give you some kingside attacking chances from the white side.
You also shut out the knight with f5, make it a little bit obnoxious because if the knight has to come out through d7, well, now this pawn is shutting it out. So we get f5, we have these squares taken from the knight, and if we come to here, well, then we have these squares taken from the knight. And so it's going to take a lot of moves to get your knight into the game after f5 gets played.
Yeah, so what was played in the game? b3?
Yeah, b3 was played, and that's not a move I really understand. I suppose the idea is that he wants to play bishop to c4. This makes sense.
And
But it
here,
feels a bit slow.
yeah, we know white wants to play f5, so we should play f5 as black. You want to play f5, and I really liked your point about getting the knight out. Like f5, maybe our knight can get to g6 later, but it's just a way to slow down white's attack. And most importantly, I really love this bishop on e3, just being stuck behind these two pawns. That's a terrible bishop for white.
Yeah, and one thing to note in these structures is that this dark square bishop is often really terrible. And so if you can envision like what's the perfect scenario that we could get to an endgame, we would love it if there's some way in the world that we could exchange our dark square bishop for their light square bishop, and then play this knight against and then play the knight against the bishop. This would be the ideal world. The second ideal world would be playing the good bishop versus bad bishop, but as we're going to see in this game, that can sometimes be a bit harder to, a bit tougher to convert than if you can somehow manage to get this knight versus bishop.
I think Bob did a good job, though, getting the good against bad bishop, as we'll see coming up. Okay, so let's see. A5 was played, a way to try to target this B3 pawn. Rook E1, bishop C7, rook to H1. So here comes white, double attacking this pawn on H7. Now Bob plays F5, strongest move on the board, and really white missed their opportunity to play F5. Now I think black is in the driver's seat, and I don't feel there's really any attack here for white. What do you think?
No, I mean, I really don't see anything because this knight does such a wonderful job of defending. This knight does a wonderful job defending h6, and if you put too much pressure on it, we can always just play h6, and we've shut out this bishop, which the bishop on d3 is the main defensive resource. I think it is a bit funny that both players should have played f5 for several moves in a row, and
Yeah.
it took a bit, but neither one of them quite understood why either of them wanted to play f5.
I haven't run any stats on it, but I feel like once both players miss an idea the first time, the second time it's more common. And for sure after that, it's like super common that you're both going to keep missing it. So
Yeah, yeah.
bishop c4 played, then the queen, she goes over to g6, bishop to c1. Now we see knight to d7. So this knight is finally coming into the game, and he has some awesome outpost squares on e4 and g4. So I'm really liking what Bob did with the knight, and we're highlighting that this bishop on c1 is a bad piece. So that's the biggest problem for white in the position.
Yeah, we would never want to trade that bishop if we can avoid it.
Yep. So queen g3 played, queen takes, king takes. Now, the cool thing here coming up is we have this situation where we can keep swapping down from the black side. And we're always taught when you're up material, swap down. Bob is up one pawn. We see the +1 under his name. I had a coach, my most recent coach, JD, he said, the number one thing you need to work on is converting the advantage. And my biggest mistake was I would swap down everything when I was only up one pawn.
Yeah, I did a couple of videos on that exact same problem that I have, where I over swapped once I'm up any kind of material. And I think perhaps that there's a good chance that Bob did that same mistake here. I realize, I mean, it's the king, the white king can't possibly be any better than our king, and it's kind of exposed there. I might be trying to find a way to not exchange the queens, or perhaps try to exchange the queens in a way that's more favorable for me. Something like queen g4, we get like something like this, where I now have this pretty far advanced option to try to create this outside pass pawn. And I do like this 4-on-2 that I have. And I'm certainly going to be able to force a pass pawn at some point here.
That's a really good point, queen g4. Yeah, because a lot of times we don't look for those moves. Like, you know in your mind, maybe you want the queen trade, but you're trying to find a better version of it instead of just saying, all right, I'm going to swap immediately.
Yeah, I think that this is probably one opportunity to perhaps think a bit differently about how you're playing. Oops, I just reset the whole position there.
I think we were right about here. Knight f6.
Right about here.
Yep. Are
Again,
you seeing my moves? Bishop d3.
Yep. Yeah, 94 played. And again, I mean, 94 is, of course, a great square, but I might have been tempted to like take a moment or two also before playing the knight to e4. I realize we get this pass pawn, but it feels like it's blockadable, and the position becomes pretty solid for both sides. I wonder if there wasn't an opportunity to try to improve some of the other pieces before we hop into e4.
Yeah, that's a good point. Um, I do see the engine likes 94 check the best, but I think like what you got to know is the more of these pieces you trade off, the greater the chances are you could slip into a drawn position where white can just hold, blockade the pawn like you mentioned. So after this trade, we know we have bad bishop against good bishop, right? This one on c1 is blocked in by a lot of pawns. Ours is not going to be blocked in by our pawns. But we got to make sure that the pawns stay fluid, or we got to look for other advantages. Like one thing coming up here, I'm just going to fast forward a little bit. We create this advantage on the A file, Bob does. And he wants to get his rook as the first piece on the open file. This was a great idea by Bob. So now let's add up the three imbalances that we have to our favor. Extra
We have a
pawn,
pass pawn,
better
a
bishop,
file,
and the file.
and a better bishop. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
in any
we do it
order.
in my order. The order that I gave it in is the important order. You can't do it in your order. No takes backsies.
All right, so what do you play here? You're black.
I think the obvious move is rook a2. I don't know that there's really any other move to consider. Although, I don't know, maybe it'd be fun. I mean, Our real advantage though is this pawn majority that we have on the king side. And so maybe we could try to do something with that. I mean, preparing to play g5 is probably a move that probably an idea that you should definitely consider is trying to manufacture this g5 break and create a passed pawn. But the move that was played, this rook a2, of course, nobody can complain about that move.
Yeah, this is my top move. There's also kind of a cool idea of the rook left over. Not real intuitive though, because you do give up the a file. Okay, so rook e2 played, g6, g3, b5. The rook's double, and
I
at
don't
this,
know if I like g6 that much, to be honest with you, because I'm not sure what we're 100% what we're accomplishing with this, and we don't need to defend this pawn yet. I might be tempted to try to bring the rook over again, or I try to do something more active, because I feel like that playing g6. I'm not sure what we're doing exactly.
yeah, it's like a move that will be useful in a lot of lines, but you don't really need it yet. Um, if g4 gets played, maybe you'll look to play g6 to defend your f pawn, but yeah, you don't need it right away. But I think this is a position where Bob can play off of the a file, having the rook here, the stronger bishop, and at some point look to play g5. But yeah, that doesn't really go along with g6. So g3 played, b5, rook here, rook e7. So at this point, what I was thinking is let's play h5 right here. And then if white tries to contest the a file, let's put our other rook on the a file. And at this point, we're not going to take a1. We're just going to improve our position and let white be the one to capture on a2, because when we capture back, there is no rook a1 because the bishop drops. So this is an improvement over the game. If we get this type of position with our super strong rook on the second, plus all the advantages that Bob had in the game, I think the win becomes much easier.
Yeah, and I think we can actually just play g5 immediately.
Yeah, I agree. Bishop
I mean,
on,
g5, you grab it. I'm going to grab this one, and these guys are going to roll.
exactly. Yep, that G pawn was hanging. So rook e7 was played in the game on 34.
I
Oh,
mean, yeah, I see the point of rook e7, but again, I mean, I suppose it's not such a big deal because we can just move the bishop out of the way and then get to the a file, and that's probably okay.
but look what ends up happening. Rook a1, rook takes, the bishop moves, rook a2, rook a7. Black doesn't get the rook imbalance advantage. So that's one imbalance lost, one more trade. And now we're down to just having the extra pawn and the better bishop, but the position's pretty locked up.
Yeah, I think this is probably going to be a bit tougher. I mean, we have to be really careful because if white manages to exchange his 5 remaining pawns, the pawn we have left is probably not going to be enough.
Yeah, the H pawn is the wrong color for this bishop.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So c4 played, and h5, bishop c3, king f7. Okay, this was kind of a critical moment in my mind. I think black really needs to find this g5 idea, and the way to do it is to put your bishop on this diagonal, and then if a move like bishop a5 was played, which is what was done in the game, trying to get over here, now you just strike immediately. Get that g5 in, the b pawn is attacked. This is a way to improve your position as black.
Yeah, and I think it just makes sense earlier as well because like our advantage is this 4-on-2, and that's probably where we should be playing, and it's where we should be looking for ideas on how we're going to improve our position. Instead, if you do something slow and try to infiltrate your king over here, I mean that's quite a bit slower and probably should work. But I just think it's more straightforward to play on the side of the board where we do have a material advantage instead of playing on the side of the board where we have a material deficit.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So now there was a bunch of shuffling. Let's see.
Poking around.
Yeah, I'm gonna go forward kind of quickly. So we see black's looking to make progress. Kind of looks at this bishop trade for a moment. And finally, he comes up with this idea that I think is a good one. He brings the king around to the queen side. So we see this king coming across. And eventually, what happens is white feels like they're forced to do something about that king marching up. And white plays pawn to d5.
And yeah, that just has the position fall apart. But I think a lot of that shuffling was kind of demonstrating the potential danger you can be in when you trade off too many pieces. Because it was difficult for white to find a way to break through, or sorry, just for black to find a way to break through, and ultimately had to wait for white to muck it up um, before they actually got the decisive crack through.
And I'll just kind of arrow through these moves so we can see how Bob finishes the game. Because even this position, it's not the easiest thing to convert. And pawns are trading off still.
Note that when G5 was finally played, it was the winning. It's what was finally necessary. It probably could have been done maybe 30 moves earlier, but G5 is
That was the
what
critical break.
ultimately
Yeah.
it was the critical break, even eventually much later on.
Okay, so now this is a pretty textbook win. You can win that pawn, and the pawn will promote through. So this was Bob G's game. He's a VIP ChessGoals member. This comes out of the Caro-Kann course from ChessGoals. There's a link in the description. So thanks for submitting this game, Bob, and hopefully you guys learned something from this game analysis. Thanks for watching, everybody. See ya.
Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.